It's clear that in the 4 years since the UNSCOM inspectors were forced out, Saddam Hussein has continued his quest for weapons of mass destruction. Intelligence reports show that Iraq has invested more heavily in its biological weapons programs over the last 4 years, with the result that key aspects of this program, R&D, production, and weaponization, are active. Most elements of the program are larger and more advanced than they were before the Gulf War. Iraq has some lethal and incapacitating agents and is capable of quickly producing, weaponizing a variety of such agents, including anthrax, for delivery on a range of vehicles, such as bombs, missiles, aerial sprayers, and covert operatives, which could bring them to the United States itself. Since inspectors left, the Iraqi regime has energized its missile program, probably now consisting of a few dozen Scud-type missiles with ranges of 650 to 900 kilometers that could hit Israel, Saudi Arabia, or other U.S. allies in the region. In addition, we know they are developing unmanned aerial vehicles capable of delivering chemical and biological warfare agents which could threaten their neighbors as well as American forces in the Gulf. Prior to the Gulf War, Iraq had an advanced nuclear weapons development program. And although UNSCOM and IAEA learned much about their efforts in this area, Iraq failed to provide complete information on all aspects of its program. They have maintained nuclear scientists and technicians, as well as sufficient dual-use manufacturing capability to support a reconstituted nuclear program. And defectors who once worked for Iraq's nuclear weapons establishment have told American officials that acquiring nuclear weapons is top priority for his regime. According to the CIA's report, all U.S. intelligence experts agree that they are seeking nuclear weapons. There is little question that Saddam Hussein wants to develop them, and the more difficult question to answer is when he might actually achieve that goal. If Iraq could acquire that material from abroad, the estimates are publicly that it could have a nuclear weapon in less than a year. Absent a foreign supplier, it might be longer. There is no question that Saddam Hussein represents a threat. I've heard even my colleagues who oppose the President's resolution say we have to hold Saddam Hussein accountable. They also say we have to force the inspections. And to force the inspections, you have to be prepared to use force. So the issue here is not over the question of whether or not the threat is real, whether or not people agree there's a threat. It's over what means we will take and when in order to try to eliminate it. The reason for going to war, if we must fight, Madam President, is not because Saddam Hussein has failed to deliver Gulf War prisoners or Kuwaiti property. As much as we decry the way he's treated his people, regime change alone is not a sufficient reason for going to war, as desirable as it is to change the regime. Regime change has been an American policy under the Clinton administration, and it is the current policy. I support the policy. But regime change in and of itself is not sufficient justification for going to war, particularly unilaterally, unless regime change is the only way to disarm Iraq of the weapons of mass destruction pursuant to the United Nations resolution. As bad as he is, Saddam Hussein, the dictator, is not the cause of war. Saddam Hussein sitting in Baghdad with an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction is a different matter. In the wake of September 11th, who among us can say with any certainty to anybody that the weapons might not be used against our troops or against allies in the region? Who can say that this master of miscalculation will not develop a weapon of mass destruction even greater, a nuclear weapon, then reinvade Kuwait, push the Kurds out, attack Israel, any number of scenarios to try to further the ambitions to be the pan-Arab leader or simply to confront in the region and once again miscalculate the response, to believe he is stronger because he has those weapons. And while the administration has failed to provide any direct link between Iraq and the events of September 11th, can we afford to ignore the possibility that Saddam Hussein might accidentally as well as purposely allow those weapons to slide off to one group or other in a region where weapons are the currency of trade. How do we leave that to chance, Madam President? That is why the enforcement mechanism through the United Nations and the reality of the potential of the use of force is so critical to achieve the protection of the long-term interests, not just of the United States, but of the world, to understand that the dynamic has changed, that we're living in a different status today, that we cannot sit by and be as complacent or even negligent about weapons of mass destruction and proliferation as we have been in the past. The Iraqi regime's record over the decade leaves little doubt that Saddam Hussein wants to retain his arsenal of weapons of mass destruction and obviously, as we've said, grow it. These weapons represent an unacceptable threat vis-a-vis Iraq, and his administration is now working aggressively with the PERM 5 members on the Security Council to reach a consensus. As he told the American people Monday night, quote, "America wants the UN to be an effective organization that helps keep the peace, and that is why we are urging the Security Council to adopt a new resolution setting out tough, immediate requirements." Madam President, because of my concerns and because of the need to understand with clarity what this resolution meant, I traveled to New York a week ago. I met with members of the Security Council and came away with a conviction that they will indeed move to enforce, that they understand the need to enforce if Saddam Hussein does not fulfill his obligation to disarm. And I believe they made it clear that if the United States operates through the UN and through the Security Council, they, all of them, will also bear responsibility for the aftermath of rebuilding Iraq and for the joint efforts to do what we need to do as a consequence of that enforcement. I talked to Secretary General Kofi Annan at the end of last week, and again, I believe, felt a reiteration of the seriousness with which the United Nations takes this and will respond. If the President arbitrarily walks away from this course of action, Madam President, without good cause or reason, the legitimacy of any subsequent action by the United States against Iraq will be challenged by the American people and the international community, and I would vigorously oppose the President doing so. Mr. President, when I vote to give the President of the United States the authority to use force if necessary to disarm Saddam Hussein, because I believe that a deadly arsenal of weapons of mass destruction in his hands is a threat, and a grave threat to our security and that of our allies in the Persian Gulf region, I will vote because I believe it is the best way to hold Saddam Hussein accountable. And the administration, I believe, now is committed to a recognition that war must be the last option to address this threat, not the first, and that we must act in concert with allies around the globe to make the world's case against Saddam Hussein. As the President made clear earlier this week, quote, "Approving this resolution does not mean that military action is imminent or unavoidable. It means that America speaks with one voice." So let me be clear. The vote that I will give to the President is for one reason and one reason only: to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. If we cannot accomplish that objective through new tough weapons inspection in joint concert with our allies. In giving the President this authority, I expect him to fulfill the commitments he has made to the American people in recent days, to work with the United Nations Security Council, to adopt a new resolution setting out tough, immediate inspection requirements, and to act with our allies at our side if we have to disarm Saddam Hussein by force.